Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So before I start, I'm just going to give a little introduction about who I am. Um, my name is Miriam Blattner. I went to Turo for undergrad. I graduated about a year ago, and I took the MCAT last year. And then shortly after taking my MCAT, I applied to medical school. Since taking the MCAT, there's a lot of people that reach out to me for help, advice, and I realized that there's a really big gap in knowledge about the MCAT in general, and I decided to try to bridge that gap and bring you some of this information. So tonight, we're really just going to be giving a very basic overview. It's really geared for those of you that are not yet studying, that are learning more about the MCAT, but at the end, you'll all have the opportunity to ask whatever questions you want, whether it be about studying for the MCAT, about pre-med classes, applications, whatever you want. And if you have questions during the presentation, you could write them in the chat and then we'll get to it at the end, or you could hold on to it until we pause for questions. Okay?
I'll just add by way of introduction, I know that some people are new to our organization. My name is Mark. I started the JPN a few years ago when I was in medical school. I was at SUNY Downstate. I'm currently a surgical urology / surgery resident at Maimonides Medical Center. We started this organization to help really medical students and residents and on, and then we realized there was a huge need for pre-med students. And so Miriam, being an excellent student, brought up this initiative to have this chat that we're going to do tonight to help the next generation of you guys move on into medical school. So, without further ado, Miriam, take it away.
Okay, thank you. So this first slide, like you see, what's on the MCAT? So as some of you may know, or you may not know, there are 4 sections. So on this little slide, it's out of order. But when you come into the exam, your first section is going to be the Chem Phys section. The next section is what we call CARS, which stands for Critical Analysis and Reasoning Skills. Then you go into the Biochem section, and lastly is Psych Soc. So you see here that every section is about 95 minutes. CARS is a little bit shorter. And the reason why it's shorter is because differently than all the other sections, CARS is entirely passage-based. What that means is that you're reading passages and then you answer, sometimes it's 5, sometimes 6 questions that are solely based on the passage. Versus in the other sections, some of the questions are passage-based and then some of the questions are standalone. There are breaks in between the sections, but the total content time is 6 hours and 15 minutes. And then the total testing time, including breaks, ends up being about 7 hours and 30 minutes. So some of you might are curious maybe about registration. So registration typically opens every year in October. So you should be prepared to register the day that it opens if you already have a plan of when you're going to be testing. If you don't have your plan yet, you could always register at a later time. But the catch is that the appointments might be all booked up and you might not be able to test at the center that you want to test at, and you might not be able to get the date that you want to test. So it's always better to be prepared, but in the event that you're not, you always have the opportunity to schedule a test at a later date. So when are you supposed to take the MCAT? So you really should take your MCAT in a way that you'll have your score back before the application opens. So the AMCAS application, which is the central application system used by all the US medical schools, the MD schools at least, opens up in May. And then there's a full month from when the system opens until you could actually submit it. So during that month, you're filling out your application, a personal statement, you're writing about all your activities. And then on the first day that you're able to submit, you want to press submit. And that's usually at the end of May. Now you want your MCAT to be back, your score to be back by the time you're ready to submit, because based on what your score is, that's where you're going to be applying. If you do less good than you intended, you want to apply more broadly. If you've got a really good score, then you might not have to apply to so many programs. So the best time to really test is before April, because it takes a full month to get your scores back. So you could test, I think that the earliest you could test might be in January. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And you could test, there's a few test dates every month. And then it takes a month to get back your score, so you want to have your test done by around Pesach. Now, this is probably the most important question, is how long should I study for? So if you are able to study full-time, and full-time studying means every single day, 9 to 5, you study for the MCAT. It's something that is incredibly difficult to do, But if you are able to do it, you'll need at least 2 or 3 full months where every single day, day in, day out, you study for the MCAT. If you're not able to do it, which was my case, and you're going to be studying part-time, then you're going to need about 5 to 6 or maybe even 7 months, depending how part-time your studying is. Now I'm going to segue off to talk about something else, which is the AAMC Fee Assistance Program. So this is something very important. Not a lot of people know about it. So the Fee Assistance Program is going to provide you a discount on the MCAT registration, the test prep products, your primary application, your secondary applications. It has a lot of value. It's very easy to apply. It's free. You just type into Google AAMC Free Assistance Program. The application will come up. I believe it closes in December of every testing year, so just keep that in mind. And you could only get the discount on the MCAT registration fee if you have this approval before the registration opens. So registration opens in October, so you should try to fill out your fee assistance program application by August, September to make sure that you have time to get all your documents in and get the approval for registration if you're approved. And then one other thing is that even if you're an independent student, it's different than like the general financial aid applications. You're going to need both your financial information and your parents' information. So just keep that in mind. So if you're currently an undergrad student, the best thing that you could be doing right now to be preparing for your MCAT is doing well in your classes. Because when it comes to studying for the MCAT, you're going to be doing something called content review. And something very important to note is that you should be reviewing that content, not learning it for the first time. Obviously, everybody's going to have some gaps and not everybody's going to have the same knowledge. But ideally, you want that most of your studying should be reviewing things that you already learned and less of learning things from scratch. So the recommended classes are typically general chemistry, biochemistry, physics for the chem phys section. And then for biochem, it's really going to depend on the school and the professor. In some places, just taking general biology is going to be enough. I went to Turo and it was definitely not enough. I also took cell bio. I took biochem, which most of you are going to take anyway. Anatomy and physiology is helpful, genetics, immunology, any bio elective that you could get your hands on and that won't be harmful for your GPA. You could go ahead and take it. It will definitely help you. For the last section, the psych-soc section, that one is generally easier to learn the content because you're not memorizing these really complicated metabolic pathways. It's more like conceptual, a lot of theories. So that, even if you don't have a chance to take psychology classes, you'll probably be fine. But I recommend taking at least 1 or 2 or 3 psychology classes, and probably the most helpful one would be biopsychology. And again, I want to reiterate that you're always going to learn the material best when you're sitting in class, when you have tests, when you have to study, when you have homework. That's when you're really going to learn your foundation. Later on, when you're doing content review, it's all going to come back to you, but it's much harder to be able to succeed on the MCAT if you didn't learn everything well the first time around. A lot of students are tempted to take summer classes or online or take the easiest professor. So that might help you in the short run, but in the long run, it might not be the best choice because when you're studying for the MCAT, you're going to have to work a lot harder. Now, let's talk about MCAT accommodations. So MCAT accommodations is a very difficult process. In college, sometimes it's easier to get some accommodations for a learning disability. But on the MCAT, they will require a full neuropsych evaluation, which can be very expensive, take a lot of time. And even if you do get an evaluation, they might not necessarily approve the accommodations. Another type of accommodation, which might be easier, is called a stop the clock break. So those are, it's an accommodation where you go in, you're taking the test like everybody else, but if necessary, they can stop the clock and give you additional breaks. And this is a little bit easier to get approved for if you have a medical need, if you're breastfeeding and you need to stop the pump. So that's another accommodation that you should look out for. It's slightly easier to get than applying for like a learning disability. So that's the basic overview. And now I'd like to open the floor to whatever questions you might have. Some of them Mark will answer, some of them I will answer, or if anybody else here has any input to say, you are welcome to do so.
All right, wonderful. Good job. Actually, do you mind pulling up your slides again, and we'll take it from the beginning. And
Sure.
that way we can also have people ask questions on the specific parts, just in case it's easy to forget all the things you just said. We can go through some questions on the chat. The first question was, do you need to take all your classes before taking the MCAT? To which someone responded, yes, unless you want to self-teach. So just to expand on that, that's correct, right? Like technically you don't have a requirement to sit for the MCAT. They're not going to make it, they're not going to look through your classes to make sure you've already taken everything that you can sit for your MCAT. Hypothetically, freshman day, someone can say, I want to sign up for the MCAT, I know everything. Obviously, that's a very bad idea if you don't know anything. So it's always ideal to take your classes and then go uh, sit for your MCAT. But hypothetically, if you were missing one class and you wanted to self-teach it to yourself before the exam, that is a possibility. Um, there's a question, who can apply to AMC? I'm not sure, Menachem, as you put that. Maybe you can expand on your question a bit. Do you
I'm
mean
assuming
for the fee assistance? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, it didn't say if it was financially based or I don't know anything like that. So
so. It is financially based, but anybody could fill out the application. And I do believe that the bracket is slightly different than the traditional like FAFSA and other financial aid applications. So I always just say it doesn't hurt to try. It doesn't take long to fill out the application. You just type in some details and who knows, you might get approved, you might not, but it's definitely worth a try because it has tremendous financial value. Applying to medical school is very expensive. So if you could get approved for that, that will help you a lot.
I'll also add that, as far as I understand, the people who have gotten approved for the financial assistance, it does carry over for when you apply to residency and things of that nature. And you often you think you get to medical school and it's over, but they don't stop. So they'll continue to gouge you for every exam you have to take, which is at least, 3 steps of your boards. You go to DO school, it's another 3 steps there. And then again, applications to residency are also quite expensive. So I believe the fee assistance actually carries over. So if you are eligible, now is a good time to get that ball rolling because it'll just continuously help you throughout your journey. Uh, Someone asked in the chat, what is the best way to improve cars? It's not a specific curriculum. I have my own thoughts, but Miriam, I'm happy to hear maybe some more updated. It's been a while since I've taken the MCAT.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with cars is that you're right, there it isn't specific, like it's not like biochem, you can improve on your content. With cars, unfortunately, it's a skill that some people have naturally and some people don't. So some people will right away, their first full length exam, do excellent in cars, and some people won't. But most people will be able to make some improvement regardless of where they started from if they do a lot of practice. What I recommend is with cars is the only section that you could start preparing for early out. Like you could just do one cars passage a week, maybe starting a year or 6 months or 3 months before you plan to even start studying. So you could just do a cars passage here and there to get used to the format. And then as you get closer to your exam, you're going to increase the amount of cars passages you're doing until you're doing 3 a day. Um, some things that helped me with cars was every time I was reading the passage to imagine that I was having a conversation with someone else and listening to their opinion. And sometimes the opinion was really absurd, and I would be like, oh, wow, that's very interesting. And remember that I'm answering the questions from the other person's point of view. You're sort of like playing detective because the question's going to ask you, based on what you just read, what do you think the author is most likely to agree with? And that's a really difficult question because the keyword is most likely. So usually all 4 options the author is going to agree with, but you need to be able to get yourself into the mind of the author and figure out which one they're most likely to agree with. Sometimes it just helps to do general reading, um, like reading newspapers or articles to get yourself used to these vocabulary and used to reading other people's opinion and then being able to make a summary out of it. Something else that helped me was after reading a passage, I would just take 30 seconds to summarize what I read in my head. And if I wasn't able to do that, I would go back and read the passage.
Yeah. I think, in short, practice, 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 right? Read, read, read. That's the only way to get good at cars. Back in the day, Jack Weston was like the big, he had 3 articles and you read them. They weren't perfectly synonymous for the
Right.
MCAT, but the point was you just kept doing them over and over until you built up that skill. I think usually I find that the boys suffer a little bit more from the reading comprehension than the girls. I would say, when you're reading, learn to be actively reading more than passively reading. It's very easy to read a story and not fully comprehend everything you're reading. MCAT is designed that you have to just like fully ingest everything you're reading. But yeah, practice is really the only way to get better at cards. And it's a difficult topic. It's
For
on there for a reason. Let's see. How long did the process of taking and finishing your undergrad classes and applying take? What medical school did you go to? So I mean, a little bit of a broad question. I'm not entirely sure what specifically you want to know, but I will say it took me about 4 years, 5 years even, to do undergrad. I took some time off. I picked up a minor. My path was not the most traditional. I often joke around that I took the scenic route. Um, I I like to point out that I took my MCAT August time, which by the time I got my scores would have been September, which would have been a very late application. I get this question from applicants all the time, like, what do I do? My scores are coming in late. Like, what do I do? Me personally, I waited a year. And I very much encourage most people to wait a year because I know you're all young and you all want to get to medical school as quickly as possible. But I try to remind you all that you're potentially trying to get like $1 million career, right? It's not crazy to hear there are physicians out there who are making $1 million a year. Don't waste that as like, do you want to go to medical school at 22 instead of 23? So you're going to try put in like a shoddy application very late in the process, right? You wouldn't bet $1 million on that. So that's the way I like to frame it. Obviously, it's a bit of an exaggerated thought process, but it's not that far off. You're investing in a 30, 40, 50-year career. Make sure you do it correctly. Um, so that's my thoughts on that. I'm happy to delve a little bit deeper as we go through some of the discussion. But just to get through some more of the questions, um,
Can I
Joseph
add one
Olivier,
thought to
oh,
what you
what was
said?
that?
Can I add one thought to what you just said?
Is it?
I think that everybody should go into the MCAT and application with the mindset of do it once and do it right. If you start going and thinking, oh, I could always take it once, I could take it twice, 3 times, by the
Yep,
time you're done taking it once, twice, 3 times, you'll be so burnt out that you won't have the strength to A, study again, or and B, apply again. It takes a tremendous amount of resources, both mental and physical, to go through this process. So everyone should go in with the mindset that they're doing it once and they're doing it right.
correct. And I will say that that actually carries over many times over for your boards. So in medical school, you take 2 steps of your boards, and this happens all the time. People are rushing; they want to get to the rotations. It's not, it's not an easy process. But if you rush to get to a finish point before really being ready to sit down for the exam, usually you're asking for trouble.
Yeah, as they
Um,
say, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
yeah. Um, taking my MCAT in late April. Does that mean I apply late May? When should I start curating a school list to apply to if I don't have my MCAT score back? Um, I'll share a few thoughts. It's a little bit of a question. If you're taking your MCAT in late April, you should be probably, I mean, first off, the AMC like pre-tests give you an idea of where you're holding, right? So that gives you a pretty generalized like where's your score is going to be. And before even asking which school should I apply to because of how good my score will be, usually the question is whether or not your score is good enough to apply with. So just for some ranges, if you're getting like 504s on like a week before the exam, there's a good chance you're gonna like actually score within that range. That's pretty well below what the average like medical school is accepting these days. And so the question will not be like, oh, which school should I curate on my list? The question will be like, should I be applying this cycle? And that's a real conversation to have. You got to weigh your the risks and benefits and whether or not you want to go to DO school because a 504 likely probably can get into DO school, but likely be much more difficult, if almost impossible to get into like an MD school versus if you're like in the 510 range and then you're probably pretty close. And if you got a 508, maybe you'd have a harder time. If you got a 512, maybe you would have an easier time. And so it's usually more so what were your pre-scores before you took stat for the MCAT? Did you sit for the MCAT at a point where you were like properly prepared? And then if you feel like, listen, my pre-exam range was like 512, I really think I did well, then just start putting together your application. Assume the best. Like just start, it's not the curating the list is actually like the last part. You got to write your 15 experiences. You got to get your letters of rec in, which by the way, you can do those things while you're studying for the MCAT. Like these things take time, sometimes months. You got to write your personal statement. I can't tell you how many times I get students come to me. It's like they're about to submit, and like, can you look at my personal statement? I go, who looked at it? And they go, no one. And I read it, and it's not in good shape. These things take a very long time to prep. These are not things that, like, even from April to May, like a 1 month timeline, that's a tough timeline. That's not like an easy, you're set up for success. That means you're going to be rushing. So all I always tell students, like, while you're even studying for the MCAT, in the back of your head, think of the small tasks you can do to get your application ready. Email professors about letters of rec if they're not already in. Start like dabbling with how you want to write your personal statement, what story you want to tell. You don't have to have a finished version by the time you're taking your MCAT. Studying is your priority, but work on the other components as well during studying time if you can. In small bits and pieces, it'll be easier to tackle. Um, Miriam, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I actually took my MCAT last year on April 25th. So I think I was like the last testing date that was able to like get their scores back before the submit date. So the day after, I think I took the MCAT's always on Friday. Just side note, I don't think we said this before, but the MCAT dates are usually on either Friday or Shabbos. So as a Jewish student, your test dates are that much more limited, just a side point. So I took my MCAT on Friday. I think I relaxed over the next few days, and then I went right into getting ready to write my personal statement, the experiences, and it was definitely a very stressful month. The way I figured out which schools to apply to, I took an average of my full lengths and I just guessed what my score would be. And that's how I made my school list. It was pretty accurate. Maybe I did like a little better than I estimated. And you could always remove schools or add schools before you actually submit. So you don't have to worry too much about that. The first step is really to fill in the application and obviously take the MCAT.
Yeah.
Quick question. How long does it take to submit the primary application? Like total,
So
how long did it take you?
So it opens, I think, on May 1st, and then it could only be submitted on May 27th or May 28th, depending on the year. So you can't even submit it for a whole month, and you're going to spend that whole month really writing your essays because every one of the 14 experiences needs like a whole essay and a story. You want to make sure it's good. You have to figure out your hours, contact information. It takes time. Also, the letters of recommendation, getting transcript, especially if you have like yeshiva, seminary, all those stuff make it very complicated. So it's going to take you like a whole month to just get through filling out your primary. Then once your primary gets submitted, it takes some time for it to get verified. If you submit the first day, I think I submitted the first day and it took 3 weeks for mine to get verified. People that submit later, it could take up to 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe even longer. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll point out with that process that there's also a lot of confusion from the day that you can submit, which is like somewhere like what, like May 28th or June 1st or whatever it is, and then you wait the 3 to 6 to 8 weeks that it takes to get verified. There's an actual date that it goes out to the schools. So you could be verified and then it will sit in the system until there's a mass wave where it's like, okay, 4 weeks are in, whoever is verified, now it goes to the schools. So students always freak out that like, oh, it's May 28th and I'm not going to be able to submit for like another 2 days. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make a difference. The 2 days won't make a difference. A week or two might make a difference if you're in the second wave. Even then, minimal difference. So time is really important. You want to apply on time, of course, but we're not talking about on the scale of minutes to days. We're talking on the scale of like weeks. So I'm always happy when I'm having to talk with students who are confused about the process, but I like putting that out there early that like there's a verification process, and then even after verified, it will take time until the system says, okay, we're sending out the first batch of applications to schools. All right, we have some more questions in the chat. What should we be looking to accomplish?
Yeah, I have a question about review.
Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I still have a lot of courses remaining until I could take the MCAT, but is it worth it to start reviewing those subjects now? Let's say if I completed chemistry and then I review it now from like an MCAT book, or is it worth just having 3 months that you focus on it and study?
If you ask me, I would say that your main goal right now is to learn chemistry right the first time. You could like have an MCAT book on the side to just make sure that whatever you're learning is actually being tested on the MCAT. Like, because not everything in your chemistry class is going to land up on the MCAT. Most of it is. But there isn't really a point in just reviewing for the MCAT so early on. I would say just make sure you're learning everything right the first time. And then when it comes to actually studying, you'll take those 3 months, those 6 months to review everything and you'll be just fine. That's what I did. And I ended up being fine. But I don't know, Mark, if you have anything to add.
I have something to add. Can you go to your slide about studying real quick?
Sure. Tell me when to stop.
It's like the this one, yeah.
Uh,
So, the one before, yeah. So, first off, to answer your question, I agree with Marion. So, like, I don't see much value in like trying to just review MCAT material before you're going to take your MCAT, especially if your MCAT's going to be in 6 months to a year from then. Like, the point of MCAT prep is like you review your courses. Um, I will say, full-time studying, 2 to 3 months. I would say 2 months is probably a bit shy. I think for most people, 3 months is probably more so the golden period. 2 months if you're really brilliant, maybe. I don't assume anyone is super brilliant. There are people out there, but I always try to talk to the masses. I think 3 months is a much more of like the accepted kind of golden period. So keep that in mind. And I would say this the part time of like a 5 to 6. I personally try to avoid. I like tell people to try not to do that. I find that the 3 months of like hardcore studying is a bit more effective than 6 months of part-time studying, partially because there's a lot of material, and by the time 6 months is done, even if you were part-time, it's easier to get burnt out. You start forgetting the things you started in the beginning. 3 months of full-time studying is the gold standard. If you kind of wave around a little bit less, a little bit more, part-time, full-time, that's up to everyone. But generally speaking, 3 months full-time studying is the gold standard. And so I want to make that clear because it could be confusing. And know yourself. It's okay to say, I'm not the strongest student. I want to do a little bit of prep before then, get to a point where I'm even ready to study, and then do my 3 months of full-time studying. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a little bit of like knowing yourself in this process. Um, so yeah, I would just say that in response to studying and when to review. Oh, the other thing I would add is that Miriam made a good point of like knowing the material while you're taking the course. I would say I and many people I know were very guilty of like not knowing any of the material. Definitely had to like self teach um, a lot of topics when it came to the MCAT. Know that that is a possible and very realistic like thing for many students. Most courses you're going to take in undergrad are just not catered to the MCAT. Uh, Honestly, like to assume that your professor in your undergrad college is like this awesome professor who's going to teach you chemistry so well that you'll know it for the MCAT is a little bit of like a dream sometimes. Depends where you go for undergrad. I will not say where I went to undergrad, but that was not the case. And this is like exceptionally true in medical school also. Like you'll find that what you're learning in medical school is really not specific to prepping you for the exams that you have to take that are kind of like the national exams. So keep that in mind. That it's great to like know chemistry backward and forward when you take the class in your undergrad, but it's often like unrealistic when it comes to like thinking that that may help you for the MCAT. It might if you have really great undergrad, curriculum, but many don't. So keep that in mind as well.
For sure.
Um,
I
yeah.
think what I was more intending to say in general is that if you have the opportunity to, take the class over the summer and just get through it versus take it over 6 months and really learn it, I would recommend that option just because you will learn it a lot better. Obviously, not everybody always has the option, but that's just what I felt personally worked. Like there were classes that I took over the summer. I took physics over the summer. And when it came to studying for the MCAT, the physics section was the hardest for me because I didn't remember the physics from when I took it in the summer.
Yeah. And that's also like a risk benefit analysis, right? Like maybe taking the summer will get to your MCAT sooner. Maybe that's what you want, but maybe you'll know the topic weaker, right? So those are things that you have to make that decision. There's no correct or incorrect. There's just understanding what you're going to be gaining from making those decisions. Um, Someone asked, what should we be looking to accomplish with the MCAT? 100%. How is the MCAT graded, and what are medical schools mainly looking for in regards to their applicants? So let's focus on the MCAT part in regards to like what medical schools want for their applicants. I mean, that's the whole holistic application. There's a lot to it. There's personal statements and activities and experiences. Grades are a big component of that. So let's start with the MCAT. As far as the MCAT, it's not graded like a normal exam because God forbid we do anything in medicine that's like straightforward and easy to understand. So of course, the exam is graded on a scale of like 530, right? That's a very normal scale. And it's broken down into the four components that Miriam showed earlier. So why don't we go to that
Sure.
screen? There we go. So it's these four core components. You get an individualized grade on each of these components. Is it still like, what is it, like 132 is the,
Yeah,
what's
the
the,
max
what,
is 132, and I think the lowest is a 118, I think.
okay, and what does it come out to? It's like the highest score is the five.
The lowest, yeah, the highest is the 528, and the lowest is I don't know, 480 something. And I think the median score is 500, and the median for each section is a 125, or the average. I don't know exactly.
So you don't want to be at those numbers. Those are bad numbers and those won't get you anywhere. So, right, 528 being like you're a super genius. It's like very rare we find anyone with those scores. Like it happens, and I've met from students who have it, but I like to talk to the masses, the normal numbers. Usually like five teens is like a really solid range. Even like low, like a 512, 511, you're still could squeeze a spot into an MD school. Once you're hitting like 508s, 509s, you're probably on the lower end of the range. So your safety point is like feel comfortable at like a 512, 54, 514, which is like ideally you want to be scoring like 128s and above per section. I don't remember exactly how many correct would lead to that 128. It's partially because it's based on the curve and there are experimental questions. But that's usually the breakdown. It's like you want at least like a 128 to like 130 per section, and then you want like somewhere in the 512 range ish and higher. And that's kind of like that's the numbers game, in addition to your GPA being a strong GPA. Have the numbers changed at all? I don't think so. I think last I coached a few people
I
were
think that
like,
the national average is curving upwards, partially because there's more applicants every year and people apply more broadly every year. I think now the national average is about a 512, 513. And they say like to be very competitive, you ideally want to get above 515. If you only want to apply to like the New York schools and you really want to stay local, you should really aim for above 515 because all the schools in the New York area, like Einstein, New York Medical College, Stony Brook, Downstate, Hofstra, Mount Sinai, all of those have MCATs that are getting closer to the 518, 519, 520 median. So if you want to stay in New York area, definitely aim for as high as possible.
yeah. I will add, and this is like my trouble with like the MSAR, which is like when you're applying, it shares like what the score range for these schools are. I've been in these schools, those are like the craziest numbers. Like you'll have like this very average school. It's like, oh, our average score is 520. Okay, there's no possible way on the planet like that's their average number. I've met some of their students, they're dumb as rocks. Like, so just keep in mind that sometimes these numbers are inflated. Um, like I've seen five low teens do just fine when applying. Even if like every school is like, oh, our average is 518 and everyone's 90th percentile, that's just not true. I don't know where the MSTAR gets these numbers. They're not that far off where you're like, oh, I have a 502, I'll get in. But they're a little bit inflated. I don't know what kind of numbers game they're playing where they're able to do that, but they are definitely inflated. So keep that in mind. I also want to take a second to talk about like look at this breakdown 95 minutes, like a section for a total of like an over 6 hour exam. This exam is a monster, right? Like imagine doing anything for 6 hours. You're gonna be exhausted. This is not something that most people are like able or like ready to do right off the bat. This takes training and not just like academic training where you're ready to answer the questions, like stamina training. Like you have to learn how to sit and just take these fucking long exams. And the reason they do this is because your boards are this long, which they're horrible. Um, and so like that's something you need to build up as well. And so part of your studying curriculum, we'll do another session where we talk more about like how to break down your studying time. But a big chunk of that is sitting for full length exams and building up the stamina to do these just like extremely long, exhausting, terrible tests that like they make them so bad that you're reading these horrible passages and you want to just leave and give up. You're like, nothing these past 4 years is worth it. And that's something that you got to get accustomed to if you're going to sit for this exam. They made it this long to really mimic your boards, which you'll have to take in a few years. Um, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, for sure. I think I did like almost close to 20 full-length exams over the 6 months that I was studying. And that was really good because when I walk into my test center, for me, I was like, okay, like I did this 20 times already. We could do it again. I got used to what food I need to eat in order to keep me going, how many times like I should have coffee in the middle. I think that was really good to really basically create a routine where you're taking these full lengths, and then it really helps with the test day anxiety.
Um, we got a couple more questions in here. What are the best resources for MCAT prep? And that's like a really like in-depth question. There's so many resources out there. We actually did a session on this maybe last year or 2 years ago, which a lot of people have found very helpful. We'll do another like follow-up session to this one, where I think we talk a lot more about the actual studying and the resources that are out there. But I'll give like a very brief answer. I usually find obviously you'll need like a combination of resources. You'll need some sort of content review, like Miriam said. That's often how most people start. I think Kaplan is kind of like a baseline good place to go. There are lots of others out there. There's like Blueprint, there's Princeton Review, there's a million out there. I don't think any one of them is like super amazing, while others are terrible. I think generally most of them are probably in the same ballpark. So, you want to spend about a month on content review, and then questions, 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 right? That's how you're going to get through this. I think UWorld has been much more of a gold standard. It didn't exist for pre-meds when I was studying, so we used different resources. But I think UWorld for questions has been really powerful for students these days. And then Anki has also become very popular in terms of like flashcard reviews. We have another video on how to use Anki. We'll talk about some decks that people could use. I think it's beyond the scope of today's conversation. But I think that's how you might want to start thinking about these things. Is like you need a content review, you need something for questions, and you'll likely want something to help you retain information that you're learning, such as like a flashcard app like Anki.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Um, Thank you so much for doing this. It's very informative and I'm really gaining a lot, so thank you. Um, I wanted to know how the committee letters work. Like some colleges, they have like pre-professional programs and you like send your letters of recommendation to like the dean. Like how does that work when you're applying to medical school? Like how does that play out?
sure. There's another question on here that someone wrote, and it's identical. So let me just read that one so we can really tackle this as one big question. Can you explain how letters of recommendations work? Can I ask professors to write them now? And how do they upload the LOR? So it really depends on your institution. Different institutions have different policies. Where I went to school, we had a committee, which was like, it wasn't a committee, it was one person. But ideally, you would have people who would write these letter of recommendations, and they were, over the years, they submitted it to this one point person. And then this one point person collected all those letters and wrote what's called a committee letter, which was like just a summary of all 8 letters. Because you have to imagine, and I really like to stress this to students, right? Medical schools get thousands of applicants, tens of thousands of applicants sometimes, right? There is not enough time on this planet to read every person's full application, 14 experiences, a personal statement, go through every course they took, and then each person has 8 letters of recommendation, right? That's not humanly possible. They don't care. So a lot of times the committee letter was a letter to summarize kind of the common themes found amongst all your other letters. And that person would write the letter and they would submit actually like a whole packet. So they would submit all the letters that were submitted to them, and then they would also submit their own kind of summary committee letter. So in my case, what that was the case, like when we asked people to send letters, we had like a specific email slash physical address that we said, hey, can you please write me a letter of recommendation and send it to this person? And this person put everything together and uploaded it all at once to the MCAT site. Not every school has that, so we could talk in a minute about what it looks like if you don't have that. But I think most schools have that kind of setup. So yeah, you can ask for a letter of recommendation from really, you finish two courses with a specific professor. You can say, hey, I'm going to be applying for medical school. Can you please write me a letter of recommendation and submit it to so and so? And then when the time comes, that person would upload all your letters, including their own committee letter. And the reason why this point person exists is because you're supposed to waive your right to see the letter. And so this is like a point of contention where like you'll get this all the time. You'll work in a clinic and you say, can I get a letter of recommendation? And the person says, sure, just write it and I'll sign it. I cannot, in good faith, tell you what to do in that situation. I could tell you when we're not recording what to do in the situation, but the way it's supposed to go is that that's not supposed to be the case. You're not supposed to see your letter because if you see the letter, that obviously changes the content of your letter. People are less free to talk about you if they know you're going to see it. So ideally, someone's supposed to write your letter and send it to the committee. You waive your right to see it, and that person uploads it to the AMCAS system. Miriam, you were at Turo? Did your branch have a committee point person?
Yeah, so I went to Turtle Flatbush and we had a committee letter. And I will add one thing is that some medical schools actually will require or say that they strongly prefer a committee letter to the point where on your secondary application, they will ask you if you did not get a committee letter, please explain why. And in general, if you're somebody that recently graduated from undergrad and did not have a very significant career break between your undergraduate, I'm not talking about like 1 or 2 years, but sometimes people, they graduate from undergrad and then they have like a significant career break and then they go to medical school 5, 6 years later. So those people don't usually get a committee letter because they've met so many people in those 5, 6 years that can, send letters about them that they don't go for the committee letter. But anyone that recently graduated undergrad should really aim to get the committee letter. The way it works is that throughout your time in undergrad, you approach professors and say, can you send a letter of recommendation to the pre-med committee? And you can also ask your employers. You could ask your research. If you're doing research, you could ask your research PI. And then closer to when you apply, I would say a few months before, you should reach out to the head of the pre-med committee at Turo Flatbush. It's Dr. Bressler, for those of you who are familiar. And he'll meet with you and help you create this letter. I did run into one issue recently because I applied to Hackensack and they specifically want the packet letter. Now, the way some schools do it is that they send a composite letter where, like Mark was saying, they take bits and pieces out of every letter and send in one composite letter. But certain schools will prefer the packet. So then you have to go on a whole runaround and get your letters again. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, letters can take a while. Be prepared to ask for them a few months in advance. Don't just be like, oh, I'm submitting next week. I'm going to get all my letters. Um, Back in the day, they allowed for up to 10 letters, and I used to tell people usually the sweet spot is around 7. You do not have to get all 10, but you want to get like most of them and get them from a range of maybe 2 academic from professors, maybe 2 from like extracurriculars, maybe 2 from research, kind of like get them a little bit some clinical experience, like spread the love. Don't just get 7 professors. They're just going to think you're an academic special needs person who doesn't do anything outside of academia. Like make sure you get your like range of letters as well and ask for them early, but like don't wait till you're about to submit because then that's asking for trouble. For point of reference, people ask me for letters, it takes me a while to get to them. Like it's not on the top of my list, I promise you. I don't wake up every day, run to the hospital, and be like, ah, I have to write this letter. Like letters are great, and I'm happy to write them, but it takes time, and I'm sure that other like people writing them feel that as well. So make sure to ask for them at the appropriate time / early enough in advance. All right. That being said, someone asked specifically, at what point should we be asking for letters of recommendation? Um, I always say that like if you're finishing your time with someone, it's a good idea to ask them right then and there when they remember you versus coming back 2 years later and saying, "Hey, remember me? I was in your class. Can you write me a letter?" Like that's not a great look, and it's just not going to be as an effective letter. If you do great and for Chem 1 and Chem 2, and then you're never going to see that professor again, but you want their letter, ask for the letter when you finish Chem 2. Say, it was great being your student. I really appreciate you as a professor. I feel like you got to know me in a way that you can vouch for my academic abilities. Can you please send the letter for when I applied to med school? That's how I did it. If I had a clinical experience that I thought was really meaningful and I thought that the person with me got to know me and would write a good letter, when I left that job, I said, hey, can you write me a letter of recommendation for medical school? Even if it was a year before I was applying, so that way I had it banked and I didn't have to, backlog and go and say, hey, we haven't spoken in a year. Can you please write a letter for me? Um, when I was doing it, you were also able to veto letters. So, like, I had someone write a letter, and then over time, I got better letters. I just very frankly asked my committee person to say, hey, like, I don't want to include this letter because I don't know what it says, but I don't want to include it because I've gotten better letters since. And that was an option. So there's no harm in getting extra letters too, and then you can kind of whittle it down to like your stronger letters or the more relevant things as you've grown in your career? All right, let's see. In the case that one scores above a 515 on the MCAT and is interested in osteopathic medicine, would you say it is a good idea to apply to DO schools? Um, I'll give you my thoughts on DO schools. My thoughts on DO schools are if you can get into an MD school, go to an MD school. That being said, let's clarify a few things. I don't believe that DOs are inherently worse than MDs. They're just letters after your name. I know some students who are DOs and they're like really great doctors, and some people who are MDs who are really not great doctors. Being a great doctor does not matter about like what letters follow your name. However, huge caveat here, right? Generally the acceptance to MD school is it's not much more, but it's more rigorous. It's more difficult to an MD school. So generally speaking, the caliber of students is a little bit higher, which means when you graduate and you're applying for residency, they take that into account. They look and say, where are you coming from school? They look at your grades on your boards and they're going to say, well, are you an MD or a DO? Some places just won't take DOs. It's not a comment that they're definitely worse. It's just policy. And the policy is based on the fact that, often speaking, on average, MD students got into the MD programs because they were stronger students. And so it's a safer bet that this person is going to be a stronger resident. You get to a better residency. I see very strong DO applicants who suffer every year applying for the residency because the last two letters after their name are DO. So that being said, if you have the opportunity to go to an MD school versus a DO school, your life will be easier coming out of school with MD after your name. And so I always recommend go for the MD if you can. That being said, if there's some extenuating circumstance where you're like, listen, the only MD schools I got into are in Memphis, Tennessee, and in Missouri, but I got into a DO school here in New York, and I have a family, and I want to stay here. Yeah, that's a very reasonable thing to say. I'm going to take the DO spot over the MD spot. But if it's a tit for tat where you're like, I have this great MD opportunity and I have a great DO opportunity, I don't really see a compelling reason to take the DO spot just because you'll learn some osteopathic medicine, because realistically, very few people actually apply osteopathic medicine in their real practice. And clinically speaking, the evidence supporting osteopathic medicine to say that it's like a definitely advantageous to know is kind of equivocal. There's no strong evidence to say that osteopathic medicine is really making or changing things. So with equivocal data that it actually does much and just making your life easier through the MD, I really don't see an argument to take a DO spot over an MD unless there's extenuating circumstances, which there are times it comes to that. I've had that conversation a few times. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing a DO. Just think if you can get your MD, it's usually going to make your life a lot easier. And the opportunities to you will be much further. Like you'll be able to apply to really competitive specialties that often DOs are just unable to apply to because of their circumstances. I hope that answered the question. Let's see, what else we got? What are some things people can do to prepare for the rigor of medical school and know if they are cut out for it, aside from the stats that applicants have, such as high GPA and MCAT score? It's a great question. I don't have a great answer, I'll be honest. Like, medical school was a unique experience for me. I love downstate because the way the curriculum was set up, I did not feel like every day was miserable. Like when came exam time, I was stressed and I was studying and I studied very hard, but there was a lot of time where I felt like I had time to breathe. And I appreciate that now a lot more than I'm in residency and there is no time to breathe. So as far as like being up for like medical school, I think most people with a high GPA, high MCAT who are do well in academics, like will not find that it's like so much different than like a really tough class in undergrad. And if you're like really struggling, you can always tap out. You can always say, okay, well, then I'm just not going to go for a crazy residency. I'll go for something a little bit more relaxed in residency. And I know people have done that. They're like, listen, kind of done. I did the whole medical school thing. It sucked. I had a family. I want to be with my family. I'm going to go ahead and do internal medicine. I'm going to go ahead and do pathology. Don't even talk to patients. Like there are things you can do to pick your residency. You have control over your course of life after medical school. So you can always kind of adjust appropriately. If studying for the MCAT made you so stressed that you hated your life, then maybe double check if you want to go to medical school, because you're going to have to take multiple of those exams, and it's really stressful. So it's a real thought to have. It's a real conversation to have. But I think a high GPA, high MCAT is usually a good indication you'll do just fine in medical school. All right, let's
I
keep
think there was
going.
actually some studies done where like they correlated certain MCAT scores to how people did on step one and step two. So there is like data out there that shows that students who generally get above a certain score on the MCAT tend to pass step one and step two.
Yeah, I mean, let's well, call it what it is. The MCAT is designed to pick the students who are going to do well in medical
Sure.
school. That is quite literally the point of getting it, right? It's very hard for us to be like, who's going to do well? Well, no, let's make a test that's just as hard for that level. So when you do well, we know you'll do well on your boards. And that's why, and like the data is there, right? And the data is so consistent that even students who go to very top tier schools, their like scores don't change. They do really well going into their school and do really well coming out. And the data saying that like, oh, it's the fact they got the Harvard education that made them score well is like there's no data to support that. Like the data is very clear. These people did very well before going to school and did very well coming out. And that whole scandal of like all these celebrities paying for their kids to get into Harvard and those kids doing just fine, right? It raised a lot of questions like, wait, if anyone could kind of just pay their way and still do fine, what is this, right? So the MCAT was designed to reflect the boards. If you do well, usually that's a good indication you're going to do well. And the schools know that. Like, that's the point, right? The schools are picking people based on their scores for that very reason. And residencies do the same. The people who score well on their boards are likely going to be strong residents because they just do well. Yeah, that's a good point, Mary. Okay. So if I really like my bio professor now, I can ask him for to give me a letter, even though I only apply a few years from now. Yeah, that's reasonable. I would say usually you want to have those if you're asking a professor to give you a letter, usually it's like you want to at least have like two courses with them. One course is a little bit weak. Um, but if they got to know you outside, they were like, the club advisor for the club you ran, yeah, you can ask for letters in advance. I would just keep in mind like keep good communication. Like ask your committee person, who's probably the chair of some department at your school, to be like, hey, I want to get to like establish myself as a student who's interested in applying for medical school. I want to be on your radar. Can I have people send letters for me on to you on my behalf? Or just open up like a clear communication. I think that's like a difficult thing when you're first starting and you're a pre-med student. You're just like, oh, I'll have this professor send an email, and they're sending an email to someone you've never spoken to, that you know nothing about, who doesn't know you, and they're like, what is this, right? So just clear communication, but a simple answer, yes. I don't see why you can't ask a professor you're close with early on to write you a letter. I think that's very reasonable. Um, let's see, we got a few more questions here. How important is research, and what type of research should one look for? Miriam, I'm a little tired. You wanna take this one?
Sure.
I'll add my few cents. Yeah.
I think that if you look at the data, most accepted students do have some type of research. In terms of what type of research you should look for anybody that's willing to give you a research spot. The way I got my research was literally I just cold emailed a bunch of people. I said, hi, this is my name. I'm at Turo. I'm very interested in your research because XYZ. And please let me know if you be willing to take me on as an intern. I probably sent like 50 emails. 49 of them never responded, but one of them did. So you just have to push through, email random people, hope that someone's going to give you a spot. And then if you do get one opportunity, you can then use that to get, more significant opportunities, and then so on and so forth. So I would say do your best to get research and start looking for your research early on.
Yeah, I would just add, having spent a little too many years on research now, I will say to get into medical school, any research and every research, like it all counts. No one cares if you're published at this stage. That's like a ridiculous expectation. It's a nice, cool thing to flex about and to be like, oh, I have a publication. But the reality is, like that is so not within your control that if you were published, it was clearly because you got lucky about the project that you were on. Usually, I mean, there are some fantastic students who are very academic and so on. I don't tear anyone down, but usually that's the case. Like most pre-meds are thrown onto a project, and if it gets published, it had nothing to do with them. So usually with research, it's like anything and everything counts. And that's the nice thing about like you have to do 15 experiences, I think it is, on your MCAT application. As long as you can talk about it, write about it, and sound like you actually did it, and sound confident about it, and explain why this was meaningful to you, like that, it's all fair game. When you get to medical school, you apply for residency, then it's a little bit more about publications and what spot of authorship and so on. And then in residency, very focused on like which journals did you publish in. But if we're going all the way back, when you're a pre-med, almost all research counts. Like regardless, was it like bench research and clinical research? Was it just like phone interviews? Like anything you can do to show you're involved usually counts. Like Miriam said, I think like a very high statistic of students have. I think that's like over 95% of students now have research. It's like very commonplace to have. It's annoying to get. It's not easy to find, but you don't have to find anything too specific. Like if you get your foot in the door on something, that's usually good enough. And hopefully each opportunity brings like a few projects that you could talk about. And that's kind of all you really need. I would say like 2 to 3 projects on your application is usually sufficient to check off that the research box for your application. And I know people hate that expression, like you shouldn't be checking boxes for your application, which is true. So don't make it sound like you're checking boxes. But we all know everyone's checking boxes. Like at your stage to be like, I love research. It's like who I am. It's helping people. Like no, we'll call it what it is. We know you're checking a box. That's okay. Just don't make it sound like that. Don't make it sound like you showed up to clock in hours. Just make it sound like you were involved in the project and that it meant something and you learned something. That's like kind of the basics. That's all you really need for research at this stage.
For sure. And whatever you end up doing, just make sure that, when you're sitting on an interview and they tell me about your research, that you actually know what you did and, yeah, like what was involved in the project. And also on your actual application, yeah, you definitely want to make it sound like it was a meaningful activity. Don't just like write a bunch of bullet points of what you did, but talk more about the project and then say like how it impacted you personally or why it was a meaningful experience for you.
Yeah. All right. Someone wrote, if you wrote a research paper that's 20 pages long for an undergrad class, does that count? Well, I guess the question is like, what was the research paper? Usually for classes, it's much more like a review. Those are like much more like at least when I was an undergrad and we had like the senior research paper, like we weren't expected to do any like real like data, mining slash analysis slash developing a hypothesis. It was much more of like a literature review. Literature reviews are research. They do get published. If you write a good literature review, I mean, it doesn't really matter what you wrote it for. Even if it's for a class, you can definitely spin it as a research project. Again, just be able to talk about it. If you want to try to get something published, that would be like the easiest way to legitimize your project to show that it was something real. Is like, oh, look, I even got it published. And I always tell people to kind of reach out to me if they need help publishing because of their own whole unique situation. But yeah, research is research. It doesn't really matter what you do. Literature review counts as research. Any sort of primary data counts as research. I've had some really weird research projects come across my desk over the years, but research is research. It counts. And honestly, even the weird ones are like kind of fun to talk about because you'll be the only one who like looked at clownfish and their biomechanisms or weird thing you're looking at. Like that's unique. Most of us are going to talk about like, the smoking caused lung cancer. So yeah, I would say like potentially it kind of matters on the details, but it can certainly be spun in a way that counts. All right. Well, pretty impressively, it looks like we've got to the end of the chat questions. Um, why don't we just do a last final sweep of the slides from the beginning? I think there were a few things I would add, just for like point of reference. And if anyone thinks of any questions now, go through it. This we talked about, the scores. It's a very long test, build up your stamina. Registration opens in October, right? Was it? Yep. We talked about the timeline. Again, you want to finish time enough to apply. And because we talked about studying, like 3 months is like the golden rule. The assistance program, yep, that it carries over into residency. What else? By September to ensure. Sorry, let's go back one. What is this? Applied by September to ensure you're approved before the October. Oh, this is for the fee assistance. Sorry, you can go on.
Sure.
General organic chemistry, biochemistry, physics. Yep, yep, exactly. Psych. Oh, I would just say like the psych section, at least when I took it, not to date myself, but when I took it, it was like the first version of this exam. They used to have just a completely different version of this exam. We were the first to take it. And the psych sociology was like, whoa, they're adding this whole component to the MCAT. And back then it was like free Jiffy points. Like the study for it was just memorizing terms. Right? It's like chemistry, you have to be able to like follow through, put together an equation, plug in the numbers. It was like a very thought-provoking section. But the psych search is like, do you know this random term that we're talking about? And they use like the 3 to 4 terms that almost mean exactly the same thing, but they want like the specific one that's correct. But it's free points if you learn the terms. So like, don't skimp out like on getting those free points. Like, do a thorough psych so section. Don't like have people be like, oh, that's the easy section. Like, don't worry about it. Like, yeah, it's the easy section. Make sure you get the points. You're gonna be kicking yourself in the pants if like you lost 4 points or something stupid when like you're like 4 points in the MCAT's huge, right? The difference between a 128 and 132 is like massive in your overall score because the difference between a 512 and a 516 is a massive difference. So don't skip out on psych search.
Yeah, I think I used to call it Cars 2.0 because a big part of the section is really just reading comprehension, and you don't even need any prior knowledge going in. And then the rest of it is just process of elimination. Like Mark was saying, 4 of the terms, like 3 of the terms will always mean the same thing, and then like one is different. So it is a very easy section, but I think by me, like it really gave me a very big boost to my score that I did well in psych soc. So it's for sure worth it to put in the effort.
Yeah. Someone asked. So first off, someone asked if we could post the slides. I don't see why not.
I mean, yeah, I could actually share it in the chat, I think. 1 second.
But we could post it on the WhatsApp group as well for
Oh yeah.
anyone who like.
Yeah, I'll do that later. Yeah, sure.
And then someone wrote, out of the undergrad courses, which are okay to kind of learn on your own before taking the MCAT if you don't want to take 4 years. I feel like psych is just one of those things. There's like a really good document out there. It's like a 100 page document or something, and it has like all the terms and everything. And I think that will get you like very far. So I guess hypothetically one could do that. I don't want to say too much because like everyone kind of learns differently. Some people are better at teaching themselves, but I feel like hardcore science is much harder to teach yourself than made up yourself. What
Can I ask a
else?
quick question?
Go for it.
How does AMCAS and medical school applications general feel about age? I'm an older applicant. I'm not coming straight out of undergrad because you said you're a non-traditional applicant. It's another question I've asked you before, so I figured may as well do it now.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to be too misleading because I've made it sound like I'm 40. I'm not. I took like 2 years extra. There are people who really take
Yeah.
like a good few years off, and that's fine. Keep in mind you're a non-traditional applicant. So there's like already a title for you, right? So there is like some sort of kind of stigma to break through. Like it exists. Like we don't just call everyone applicants. If there was no stigma, everyone would just be applicants, right? But instead we have like traditional applicants and non-traditional applicants. So I'd say like there's some stigma there. Age alone is not a reason to not accept someone. Like I had guys in my med school class who were like significantly older. This was like their second career. It's not really a problem, but just make sure you have a good story. Right? They don't want to hear the guy who's like, "Oh, what were you doing for 5, 10 years?" And you're just like, "I was kind of figuring out life, man." Like no one wants that, right? You want the guy that's like, "Yeah, I was a banker and I realized how soulless it was, and I was making oodles of money, but realized like my life was kind of empty, and I wanted to go back to medicine and like do something with my life that's like contributes to society." There's like a much stronger answer than just like, "No, I was in between jobs. I worked for my dad, and now I want to like wake up and pursue a career." So I feel like you will get asked about it, like why are you a non-traditional applicant? Like what was your path towards medicine? Just have like a good formed answer about like what you're doing and why and what the change in your life was. And that's really for anything that they're going to ask you. Lots of schools like to ask you about the weak point in your application. They're like, oh, I see you got a C in organic chemistry too. Why? Right? And that's like a stupid question. It's like, why? Because it was a really hard course, right? But there's 2 ways to answer that question. The first one is like, oh, the teacher was so mean, and the tests were so hard, and blah, blah, blah. And you put the blame on someone else versus you own up to it and you say, I struggled with that course for X, Y, and Z. And I worked really hard and actually did really well in my MCAT on that section, right? That's like a much more like formed thought and answer, and it's thoughtful, and you're not putting blame on anyone, and you're owning up to the problem. So I would say like anything you share on an interview, like be ready to just have a fully formed idea that you're sharing and something that sounds good. So same for non-traditional applicants, just like have a good answer for when they ask you about it.
Thank you.
Let's, we'll wrap up the last two questions. Is it better to be a traditional applicant or do we want to be different than everyone else? So traditional versus non-traditional. Traditional usually just means that you did the typical, like you started college when you were 18 and then you're 22 and you're applying. It's not doesn't mean you're the same as everyone else. It just means you followed like a similar path. There is a thought process of like you want to stick out a little bit, right? You want to be a unique applicant. So if you have some weird hobby, like oh, they love that you played the trombone for 12 years, awesome. Like put that on your experiences because they're going to ask you about that far more before they ask you about your research on your general chemistry class, right? They don't like everyone did the research, no one plays the trombone. So like they love weird hobbies and stuff. So being unique is a good thing. Doesn't mean you have to take 10 years to be a professional trombone player before you apply to medical school. Like that, certainly not. So traditional versus non-traditional is usually just more of a timing thing, but being unique is a helpful thing when you apply to medical school. Be like free to share your story, and you should. Everyone should share their story. Everyone's unique in their own way. That's kind of the point of a personal statement, is you're trying to tell them why you are like who are you, right? You're trying to explain why you're going into medicine, why you're doing what you're doing, and you don't want to sound like everyone else. You want to have your unique story because you are a unique person. So that's what I would say to that. Um, do you recommend taking anatomy and physiology in undergrad, even though it's not required? I have mixed feelings on it. Um, I think if you take it, it will help. You do anatomy in medical school. It's a big part of our curriculum is always anatomy. You're not going to get away with that. So having a background in it will help you, but it doesn't really seem to help you get into medical school because they don't really care. It's not like general science they know is like the harder courses, so they like to see that you've done well because that will predict doing well in their courses. Anatomy is like kind of like a memorization course, and they're like, we're going to teach it to you anyway. Like we're going to go very in depth and teach you anatomy. So over the years, it never seemed like it was something that stuck out, something they really wanted. I think some schools do now actually require it though. So you want to always check the requirements of the school. But as an overall, I've never seen anyone like blown away by like anatomy and be like, oh, great, you have anatomy. We're so happy. Because like you're going to learn anatomy in med school. Like that's a big part of med school. So that was kind of the thought process back in the day. I don't know, that may have changed a little bit, especially as they move to like some places do like virtual anatomy. But I think for the most part, it's kind of stayed the same with some schools requiring it. I don't know, Miriam, you probably know a little bit more of the requirements than I do for current schools.
I think that some schools, some of them will like strongly recommend it. I feel like schools nowadays are leaning more towards like strongly recommending thing versus requiring. That's what I've seen a
Fair enough.
lot. In general, like don't take a class if it's gonna ruin your GPA. Like if you're gonna load it up with chemistry and physics and all kinds of things and then take anatomy and physiology with it and then get a C in all those classes, it's not worth it. So for sure only take a class if you think you're gonna do well. As far as the MCAT, I think that anatomy and physiology 2 is generally more helpful because it's less memorization, it's more broad, it teaches you about the different systems and it's helpful. But I don't think it's for sure necessary because in your bio classes you will cover a nice amount of that material regardless.
Yeah. And then to the following question, like what about genetics and cell bio? Does that come up on the MCAT? Again, I feel like at least where I was, genetics and cell bio was just fancy regular biology. And like having strong foundations of biology will be very helpful for biochemistry and the MCAT. Like the MCAT is very biochemistry heavy, which is obviously built on a lot of bio. And having genetics and cell bio like in your back pocket as well just gives you like a stronger foundation for regular biology slash biochemistry. I feel like that did at least it helped me when I took my MCAT. I felt like that was helpful. It's certainly not required. Like you're gonna have a very deep, strong understanding of bio and biochemistry when you sit down for the MCAT. Like that's the goal.
Yeah, I agree. I also took cell bio. I did not take genetics, and I definitely felt that cell bio was very helpful for going through like some of the passages get very nitty-gritty about cellular things. And it's always nice to be able to have a background to be able to understand what they're telling you there.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's getting late. It's my bedtime, but this was awesome. I'm so happy to see you guys. It's amazing you were able to come out. Miriam, it was a fantastic presentation. I think you helped a lot of people tonight. Guys, just stay on the chats and like stay involved. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can't say if Miriam's willing to have people reach out to her, but she seems like she is.
I'm very
Um,
happy you guys could all reach out to me.
and good luck. We'll try to be doing this a little bit more regularly, a little bit more frequently. It was a pleasure meeting you all, and feel free to reach out to me personally if you need anything. All right.
Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and share the slides on the